Welcome back. I'm talking to Carl James about the CIA's alleged research into mind control, but also ESP and psychic phenomena. And we were discussing Dr. Edgar Mitchell and Uri Geller, because he's alleged to have brought Uri Geller over to the United States.
and Mitchell did it.
To have to be tested. Now, so you want my opinion of Uri Geller? I just think he's a showman. That's my opinion of him. I don't know whether he's got any psychic ability, but I think he could well have been chosen to fool people into thinking that they were investigating it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it could well be that there was a cover. I mean, I'm very much open to this idea of remote viewing and that sort of thing. I think maybe there is something to it, very much so. But I think it's not so much about what happened with Geller there. It's more about the fact that whatever was going on there, under what sort of cover it ever was being funded by the CIA. September 6, 1995, CIA majority funding of the research was revealed, a public affairs statement. And then they found out additional funding came from US Army Intelligence Security Command, the DIA, the US Air Force, the US Navy, and again NASA. And like in the former clip, you can see Edgar Mitchell saying he'd previously claimed that they'd funded it. But then Mitchell begins reiterating this idea that he was not aware of the CIA involvement until after the testing had been concluded. But there are a couple of points to be made there with this. I mean, they're worth thinking about. There's this quote from the book Phenomenal World by Joan Dark. Basically, she's quoting the research of Ronald M. McRae. She said in his book, Mind Wars, The True Story of Government Research into Military Potential of Psychic Warfare, some interesting things to say about Edgar Mitchell and ions. He writes that George Bush, while director of the CIA, was approached by Mitchell, a personal friend for many years. McRae writes that Bush gave Mitchell permission to organise high-level seminars at the CIA to discuss possible intelligence applications of parapsychology. Despite this support, according to McRae, parapsychology research was never quite institutionalised at the CIA, i.e. it had never had its own department or centralised location, but was pursued as scattered research projects. McRae notes that Mitchell implicated bureaucratic inertia as the problem. Mitchell stated, "We just couldn't get the actors together." That's an interesting word, that is, actors.
Right.
There was always one bureaucratic bottleneck or another. Apparently the problem was solved. The program moved to SRI and the Institute of Neuroscience Sciences and other known CIA cutouts. So effectively he's saying there that Mitchell was involved with the idea beforehand in the CIA. And Mitchell, in fairness, Mitchell has actually owned up to the fact that he debriefed George Bush. But again, he said I did it after the Geller testing, after we knew that...
And there are other things about Mitchell which you can, if you watch this particular Rich Planet program, the link's on the screen there, you'll find out some things about Dr.
There's Brewster Palmer with the N machine and things like that.
Which cast aspersions against what his agendas really are about. And in your notes you say, under hypnotic guidance from Puharich, Geller speaks of a vast entity, stroke consciousness, supercomputer located aboard a spacecraft, blah, blah, blah. Right? Under hypnotic guidance from Puharich. So Uri Geller is speaking under hypnotic guidance from
I mean,
Puharich.
those Puharich's own words in The Sacred Mushroom. Uri, the book Uri.
Right.
He admits that he put... his claim is that he put Geller under hypnotic guidance. But that idea of these machine entities, it crops up so much in the SRI, the Lab 9 scene. You get Jack Sarfati, who talks about receiving a telephone call from this machine entity saying he's on a spaceship coming to the Earth in 1952, 53, something like that. Geller saying the same thing. And then effectively, Star Trek the Motion Picture is that story. I mean, you could argue that even if he didn't get to write the screenplay for the 9, certainly some of those ideas bled through into Star Trek the Motion Picture, because you have this V'Ger entity who's coming back to Earth, he's a vast super intelligence in the film, and wants seeking out its creator and all this kind of thing. Every version through the late 70s of that film talks about this idea of...
Well, let's just mention Star Trek and Roddenberry, the fact that he lost control, or creative control over it, right? Presumably in the early days he must have had more control over it, because there's the quotation that we can have a look at now.
They're going to do a new one. It'll probably be shot on a high budget TV movie. Then if it's if it has the ability to do it, they'll put it in the theaters or they'll keep it on TV. I'm not going to do it. They will not give me the creative controls I had on the early shows. They will not give me the creative controls I had on the early shows.
Right. So clearly, what he seems to be saying there is that he was the creative force behind Star Trek. But then at some point they said, no, it's too important.
Essentially, it would have been after Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which is why I find it odd that you've got all this Lab 9 stuff connected to, and the message of the 9 connected to the CIA and the military and NASA and all that. I mean, NASA, Richard Hoagland was involved, via NASA, getting the first space shuttle named Enterprise after the Starship Enterprise in the series. So you've got forces pulling at it. And then after Star Trek: The Motion Picture is released, it's a huge box office success. I mean, critically maybe not so much. $139 million worldwide, and Paramount just hate it and they want somebody to blame for it. And Roddenberry effectively is, you get different arguments with this biographies about Roddenberry, but he's just removed from all creative control over Star Trek. It has a little bit when Star Trek: The Next Generation, the television series, comes back in the late 87, but above and beyond like the first year or so of that.
So if I can just ask you, because I don't recall much of the film series of Star Trek, the films, what do you think the agenda that was that they were trying to create in people's minds, and why? What was the what are they selling there? What are they trying to get people to perceive about?
I think it was away from what Star Trek was originally about, and certainly the subsequent television series that are very NASA orientated, that sort of thing. I think essentially it went in a sort of promoting the US military direction. Certainly you've got Harve Bennett, who's heavily involved in those films, and they're much darker, they're much more militaristic. You've got even things like the Masonic thing as well. If you look at the uniforms, the Prussian red and all that, and some of the medallions, the uniforms, they look like the sort of Knights Templar, Knights Malta sort of symbology and all that sort of thing. It's very much away from NASA, and it's very, very much away from what Gene Roddenberry always... He said it was too militaristic. When he came with Star Trek: Next Generation, he wanted to take it back to this idea of NASA, space exploration.
Of Captain Kirk making love to women on strange planets and things like that.
Well, I mean, nothing wrong with that, I suppose.
All right.
But yeah, I mean, in and of itself, it's really strange because even though they wouldn't let him anywhere near it, every subsequent Star Trek film, he pitched a story. He wanted to take credit for taking a story, seemingly. But he pitched the same story every single time.
And this is about Kennedy.
Yeah, this idea that the Enterprise crew travel back in time and get involved in sort of changing World War II, something like that. Effectively, the story ends with Mr. Spock being the man on the grassy knoll firing the...
So I'll just expand on that. So Gene Roddenberry was obsessed with this particular plot line of Star Trek somehow being involved in the Kennedy assassination. So just explain it.
It's like he's post-9...
This has never been made.
No.
He's wanted this to be made.
He proposed it for
years, right? So
I mean, this is actually...
Just tell us what happens.
Essentially, this is the quote from Harve Bennett, who was controlling so much of the film franchise at that point. He says, no matter what we'd come up with, Gene wouldn't like it, and he countered by pitching a story about the crew of the Enterprise coming back to stop Kennedy's assassination. Through my tenure on Star Trek, that story came up as a substitute for whatever we were planning. Star Trek 2, 3, 4, 5, it didn't matter. He pitched it as effectively up to the point where he died. Every single subsequent film, he was obsessed with it. He was, I mean, some people say he had a lack of imagination. He couldn't come up with any other stories. He was determined to, but it just seemed odd that that's the subject matter. And knowing what the people like you and I know about JFK as well. Right.
So do you think he was wanting to reveal something that he knew in a fictional way?
I don't know. I mean, that would just purely conjecture on my part. I mean, it may be possible, but given what he was involved with the CIA and with the 9 and all that, being in that circle of people. I'm not saying he involved the CIA, but he was connected to those people who were involved. He would have been privy to knowledge of some sort, and he was perfectly acceptable to articulate it in his Star Trek material. So maybe.
All right, Court. Well, we're going to talk more after this.